Don't trust them, neighbors warned. At 50 Apache warriors arrived to thank the widow with dementia. In the dusty frontier town of Willow Creek, 1887, everyone whispered warnings about the Apache tribe nearby. But when 50 painted warriors rode into town at dawn, they weren't seeking revenge. They were searching for one forgotten woman whose kindness had saved their children's lives. Now, as dementia clouds her memory, these proud warriors have come to honor a debt that transcends fear, prejudice, and time itself. If this story of unexpected friendship and forgotten kindness touches your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales from the American frontier. And don't forget to comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching this incredible true story unfold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Arizona Territory as Martha Henderson swept the wooden porch of her modest cabin for the third time at 72 years old. Her once sharp mind had begun to drift like tumbleweeds in the desert wind, leaving her caught between the present and memories that felt more real than the weathered boards beneath her feet. "Martha, you already swept that porch clean as a whistle," called out her neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, from across the narrow dirt road. Eleanor was a stern woman with silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her features, and she had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of Martha's daily routines since Dr. Wilson had quietly shared his concerns about Martha's increasingly confused state. Martha paused mid-sweep, looking down at the immaculate porch with genuine surprise. "Did I? Well, I suppose I did." She leaned the broom against the adobe wall and adjusted the faded blue shawl around her shoulders. "Thomas always said a clean porch welcomes honest folks and warns off the troublemakers." Eleanor's expression softened at the mention of Thomas Henderson, Martha's late husband, who had died 3 winters past from a fever that swept through the territory. Thomas had been a good man, a former cavalry officer turned rancher, who had earned the respect of every soul in Willow Creek. But Martha's mind seemed to forget his passing more often than not, still setting 2 plates for supper and talking to his empty chair by the fireplace. "That's right, Martha. Thomas was a wise man," Eleanor replied gently. Then her voice took on a more urgent tone. "Now, you remember what we talked about yesterday, don't you? About staying close to town and not wandering off toward the canyon?" Martha's brow furrowed as she tried to grasp the memory that Eleanor was referencing. The canyon. There was something important about the canyon. Something that made the other townspeople whisper and look over their shoulders, and the wind carried unfamiliar sounds from the red rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels around their small settlement. "The Apache," Martha said suddenly, the word coming to her lips unbidden. "You're worried about the Apache?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "That's right. There've been signs, Martha. Hoof prints near the water source, smoke signals spotted by the Miller boys when they were checking their cattle. Sheriff Coleman thinks they might be scouting the area, maybe planning something. These are dangerous times, and with your condition. Well, we just need you to stay safe and close to home." The mention of the Apache stirred something deep in Martha's mind, like stones shifting in a riverbed. Images flashed through her consciousness, brown faces painted with meaningful symbols, strong hands offering gifts, children's laughter echoing through the canyon walls. But the memories were fragmented, scattered like pieces of a broken mirror that she couldn't quite reassemble. "They're not dangerous," Martha said quietly, so quietly that Eleanor had to strain to hear her. They're just trying to survive, like all of us." Eleanor's face hardened. "Martha, you don't know what you're saying. The Apache raids in the Southern Territories have folks scared from here to California. Just last month, we heard about the troubles near Fort Apache. These aren't the peaceful times your Thomas knew when he first came out here. Things have changed, and not for the better." But Martha wasn't listening anymore. Her attention had been captured by a hawk circling high overhead, its wings catching the morning light as it rode the thermal currents above the canyon. For a moment, watching that bird, she felt a profound sense of peace, as if something important was about to happen, something that would make everything clear again. The peace was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Both women turned toward the sound, and Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to her throat. Coming down the main street were 3 riders, Sheriff Jim Coleman, Deputy Pete Morrison, and Dr. Samuel Wilson. Their faces were grim, and they rode with the urgency of men bearing troubling news. Sheriff Coleman was a big man with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of winter storms. He had served as law enforcement in Willow Creek for over a decade, and his reputation for fairness was matched only by his reputation for toughness when the situation demanded it. As he dismounted his horse, his boot stirred up small clouds of dust that danced in the morning air. "Ladies," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting, "I'm afraid I have some concerning news to share with you and the rest of the folks in town." Dr. Wilson, a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, approached Martha with the gentle manner he had cultivated through years of treating everything from broken bones to broken hearts. "Good morning, Martha. How are you feeling today?" "I'm quite well, thank you, doctor," Martha replied, though her eyes kept drifting back to the hawk still circling overhead. "Just enjoying this beautiful morning." Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Pritchard, Mrs. Henderson, I need to inform you that we've had definitive confirmation of Apache presence in the area. My deputy here found fresh campfire remains about 5 miles north of here, and the tracks suggest a sizable group, possibly 20 or 30 individuals." Eleanor gasped and pressed her hand to her chest. 30 of them? "Dear Lord, Sheriff, what are they planning?" "We don't know their intentions," Coleman replied carefully. "Could be they're just passing through, or could be they're planning something more, problematic. What I do know is that every family needs to take precautions. Keep your doors locked, especially at night. Don't venture out alone, and if you see anything unusual, smoke, riders, strange sounds, you come find me immediately. Deputy Morrison." A young man barely out of his teens with sandy hair and earnest blue eyes shifted nervously in his saddle. "Sheriff, should we maybe consider sending word to Fort Verde for additional support?" Coleman considered this suggestion carefully. Fort Verde was a 2-day ride south, and calling for military assistance was not a decision to be made lightly. Such actions had a way of escalating situations that might otherwise resolve themselves peacefully. "Let's see how things develop over the next day or two," he decided. "But I want everyone in town to remain vigilant." Wilson had been watching Martha carefully during this exchange, noting how her attention seemed to drift in and out of the conversation, like a butterfly unable to settle on any single flower. Her condition had been worsening gradually over the past year, and he worried about her ability to understand and respond appropriately to potential danger. "Martha," he said gently, "do you understand what the sheriff is telling us about the importance of staying close to home?" Martha turned her clear blue eyes toward him, and for a moment they held a spark of the sharp intelligence that had once made her one of the most respected women in the territory. "Dr. Wilson, I've lived in this country for over 40 years. I was here when this was nothing but a trading post and a prayer. I've seen drought and flood, prosperity and hardship, war and peace. I may forget where I put my spectacles or whether I've had my breakfast, but I remember the important thing." The 3 men exchanged glances, unsure whether Martha's words reflected genuine understanding or were simply the product of her confused mental state. Eleanor, however, felt a chill run down her spine at the conviction in Martha's voice. "What important things, Martha?" Dr. Wilson asked softly. Martha's gaze drifted back to the hawk, which had now been joined by a second bird, the two of them riding the air currents in what looked almost like a dance. "I remember that kindness matters more than fear," she said. "I remember that people are people, whether their skin is red or white or brown or black. And I remember that sometimes the ones everyone tells you to fear are the ones who most need your help." Sheriff Coleman frowned. "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, these are dangerous times. The Apache have been raiding settlements throughout the territory. Whatever happened in the past, whatever peaceful relations your husband might have had with local tribes, things are different now. The wars have changed everything." But Martha shook her head slowly, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The wars didn't change the Apache, Sheriff. The wars changed us." The afternoon heat shimmered off the dusty streets of Willow Creek as the townspeople went about their daily routines with an undercurrent of nervous energy. Word of the Apache presence had spread quickly through the small community, carried from door to door by whispered conversations and worried glances toward the surrounding canyon walls. Martha Henderson sat in her favorite rocking chair on the front porch, her weathered hands working steadily on a piece of needlework that seemed to absorb all her attention. The pattern was intricate geometric designs in deep blues and earthy browns that seemed oddly familiar to anyone who might have seen Apache beadwork, though no one in town would have made such a connection. "Martha, what in heaven's name are you working on there?" Eleanor Pritchard asked as she approached with a basket of fresh bread, her daily excuse to check on her increasingly confused neighbor. Martha looked up from her work, blinking in the bright sunlight, as if emerging from a dream. "Oh, hello, Eleanor. I'm not quite sure, to tell you the truth. My hands seem to remember the pattern even when my mind doesn't." She held up the needlework, revealing a complex star design surrounded by smaller symbols that seemed to tell a story. It's strange how our bodies can remember things our minds forget, isn't it? Eleanor set down her basket and took a closer look at the needlework, feeling a strange unease at the unfamiliar patterns. Where did you learn to make something like that? I've never seen you work on anything quite so, elaborate. I don't remember learning it, Martha said honestly, her fingers tracing the stitches with obvious affection. But it feels important somehow, like something I need to finish before ... double quotes. She trailed off, her expression growing distant. Before what, Martha? Before they come, Martha said simply, then seemed surprised by her own words. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Sometimes I say things that don't make much sense. Dr. Wilson says it's part of my condition. Eleanor felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. Who's coming, Martha? What are you talking about? But Martha had already returned to her needlework, her fingers moving with surprising dexterity for someone her age. Would you like some lemonade, dear? I think I made some this morning, though I can't quite remember. Eleanor decided to change the subject, though Martha's words continued to echo in her mind. Actually, that sounds lovely. Let me help you get it. Inside Martha's cabin, everything was neat and orderly, though Eleanor noticed several peculiar details that hadn't been there during her last visit. A collection of smooth stones was arranged on the kitchen table in what looked like a deliberate pattern. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, not the usual cooking herbs that most frontier women kept, but unfamiliar plants with strong, earthy scents. Martha, where did you get these herbs? Eleanor asked, pointing toward the ceiling. Martha followed her gaze and smiled. Oh, those. I found them growing near the canyon yesterday, or was it the day before? Time gets so muddled for them. They're for healing, I think. Someone taught me about them once, someone who knew about plants and their properties. Who taught you? I don't remember anyone in town knowing much about herbs like these. Martha's eyes grew distant again. She had such gentle hands, and her voice was like music when she spoke. She taught me which plants could heal a fever, which ones could ease the pain of childbirth, which ones could draw poison from a wound. Her name was ... double. Pause. Martha paused, pressing her fingers to her temples as if trying to coax the memory forward. Her name was something beautiful, something that meant little bird in her language. Eleanor felt increasingly uncomfortable. What language was that, Martha? Apache, Martha said without hesitation, then looked surprised at her own certainty. Yes, she was Apache. And her children. Oh, her children were so beautiful. Dark eyes like midnight and laughter that could make the saddest heart sing. Eleanor nearly dropped the glass pitcher she had been holding. Martha, you need to be very careful about saying things like that. Especially now, with everything that's happening. People might misunderstand. Misunderstand what? Martha asked innocently. The truth? Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew both women to the window. Sheriff Coleman was riding hard down the main street, his face grim with purpose. Behind him rode Deputy Morrison and two other men that Eleanor didn't immediately recognize, rough-looking individuals with the weathered appearance of scouts or trackers. Something's happening, Eleanor muttered, her heart beginning to race. Martha, I think we should go inside and lock the doors. But Martha had moved to the front door and was stepping out onto the porch, her needlework still clutched in her hands. Sheriff Coleman looks troubled, she observed calmly. Perhaps we should see if there's anything we can do to help. Martha, no, Eleanor hissed, but it was too late. Martha was already walking toward the main street, moving with more purpose and clarity than Eleanor had seen from her in months. Sheriff Coleman dismounted his horse and approached them, his expression grave. Ladies, I'm afraid the situation has become more serious. These gentlemen here are trackers from Fort Verde, Morrison and Bill Crawford. They've been following Apache sign for 3 days. And the trail leads directly toward our canyon. Jake Morrison was a lean man with sun-darkened skin and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Ma'am, he said, touching his hat to Martha, we've got evidence of a substantial Apache war party moving this way. Could be as many as 50 warriors, all painted for battle. Martha tilted her head, studying the tracker with interest. Painted for battle? Are you certain that's what the paint means? Morrison looked taken aback by the question. Ma'am, I've been tracking Apache for over 15 years. I know war paint when I see signs of it. But do you speak Apache? Martha asked gently. Do you understand their customs, their reasons for doing things? Crawford, the other tracker, laughed harshly. Lady, the only thing you need to understand about Apache customs is that they don't much care for white settlers on what they consider their land. Paint or no paint, 50 Apache warriors heading toward a small town like this means trouble. Martha looked down at the needlework in her hands, her fingers tracing the patterns thoughtfully. Mr. Crawford, have you ever considered that there might be other reasons for their journey? Reasons that have nothing to do with warfare? Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his voice patient but firm. Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your optimism, but we need to deal with the reality of the situation. I'm ordering all families to move into town center. The church, the general store, and the saloon can accommodate everyone. We'll post guards and wait to see what develops. And if they want to talk? Martha asked. If they come in peace? Crawford spat in the dust. Apache don't come in peace to white settlements, lady. They come to take what they want and burn the rest. Martha's expression grew sad, and she shook her head slowly. Mr. Crawford, I think you've confused Apache with desperate people pushed beyond their limits. There's a difference. Eleanor tugged at Martha's sleeve. Please, Martha, let's just do what the sheriff says. Let's go to the church and wait this out safely. But Martha was looking toward the canyon. Her eyes focused on something none of the others could see. They're not coming to harm us, she said with quiet conviction. They're coming to settle something, to complete something that was left unfinished. Jake Morrison studied Martha with new interest. Ma'am, have you had dealings with Apache before? Is there something you're not telling us? Martha's hand went to her throat, where a small leather pouch hung on a thin cord, mostly hidden beneath her dress. I don't remember, she said honestly. There are so many things I don't remember clearly anymore. But my heart remembers, and my heart tells me we have nothing to... Sheriff Coleman made a decision. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to ask Eleanor to escort you to the church immediately. This isn't the time for philosophical discussions about Apache intentions. We have the safety of every person in this town to consider. As if summoned by his words, young Tommy Miller came running down the street, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Sheriff Coleman, my pa sent me to tell you. There's smoke signals coming from the North Canyon wall. 3 columns of smoke rising straight up. The men exchanged grim looks. Morrison nodded grimly. That's a gathering signal. They're calling in more warriors. But Martha smiled softly, her hand tightening around the leather pouch at her throat. No, she said quietly, they're announcing their arrival. They're letting us know they come with peaceful intentions. Crawford snorted. Lady, you're either the bravest woman in Arizona territory or the most foolish. Martha looked directly at him, and for a moment, her eyes held the sharp clarity of her younger self. Mr. Crawford, sometimes there's no difference between the two. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Willow Creek, the entire town buzzed with nervous energy. Families had gathered their most precious belongings and made their way to the designated safe locations, while the men formed impromptu patrols and checked their weapons with the grim efficiency of people preparing for the worst. Martha Henderson sat quietly in the back pew of the small wooden church, her needlework spread across her lap as her fingers continued their intricate work. Around her, the other women whispered prayers and comforted crying children, but Martha seemed untouched by the anxiety that filled the air like smoke from a prairie fire. Martha, how can you be so calm? Whispered Rebecca Miller, Tommy's mother, as she clutched her infant daughter close to her chest. Don't you understand what's happening? There could be 50 Apache warriors heading straight for us. Martha looked up from her work, her blue eyes reflecting a strange mixture of confusion and clarity. Rebecca, dear, I understand more than you might think. Sometimes when my mind gets foggy about present things, the past becomes crystal clear, like looking through clean glass instead of muddy water. Eleanor Pritchard, who had positioned herself protectively beside Martha, leaned closer. What past, Martha? What are you remembering? Martha's fingers paused in their stitching as a distant look crossed her face. I'm remembering a summer 23 years ago, when the fever came through the territory. Do you remember that summer, Eleanor? Half the children in 3 counties were burning up with temperatures that wouldn't break, and Dr. Patterson, he was our doctor then, before Dr. Wilson came, was at his wit's end. Eleanor nodded slowly. I remember. We lost several children that summer. It was a terrible time, but we didn't lose Thomas Jr., Martha continued, her voice growing stronger with the memory. My boy was one of the sickest, burning up so hot I thought his little body might just turn to ash. Dr. Patterson had given up hope, told me to prepare for the worst. Rebecca leaned forward, drawn into the story despite her fear. But Thomas Jr. survived. He grew up and moved to California. How did he recover when so many others didn't? Martha smiled, her hands resuming their careful stitching. A woman came to our door one night during the worst of it. She was Apache, probably no more than 30 years old, with a baby strapped to her back and 2 little ones holding onto her skirt. She spoke broken English, but she made me understand that she had medicine, plants that could break the fever. The women around Martha had stopped their nervous chatter and were listening intently. Even Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, the preacher's wife, had moved closer to hear better. I was desperate, Martha continued. My baby was dying, and this woman This Apache woman was offering help. Thomas was away on cavalry business, and I was alone with my son's life in my hands. So I let her in. Eleanor's eyes widened. You let an Apache woman into your home? During a fever epidemic? Best decision I ever made, Martha said firmly. Her name was Ayanna. It means eternal blossom in their language. She spent 3 days and nights at Thomas Jr.'s bedside, brewing teas from herbs she carried in a special medicine bag, singing songs in Apache while she bathed his forehead with cool water. And somehow, she pulled him back from the edge of death. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. What happened then? Martha's expression grew warm with the memory. She saved 4 more children in town before the fever finally broke. Mrs. Patterson's youngest daughter, the blacksmith's son, little Mary O'Connor, and the Hendricks boy. 5 children who would have died if not for Ayanna's knowledge and kindness. The townspeople? Mrs. Jenkins asked, though something in her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Martha's face clouded over. They were grateful for about a week. Then the fear crept back in. Apache raids were increasing in other parts of the territory, and people started wondering if Ayanna had only helped our children so she could scout our defenses. The whispers started. Then the accusations. Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. What kind of accusations? They said she must have been gathering information for a war party. They said no Apache would help white children unless there was some ulterior motive. Sheriff Patterson, Jim Coleman's predecessor, was pressured to investigate whether she was a spy. Martha's needlework had taken on more complex patterns as her memory sharpened, the geometric designs seeming to flow from her fingers without conscious thought. Thomas came home to find half the town convinced that I had harbored an enemy agent. The accusations got so bad that Ayanna finally had to leave for her own safety and ours. But surely people remembered that she had saved their children, Rebecca protested. Martha shook her head sadly. Fear has a way of rewriting history, dear. Within a year, the story had changed. Instead of the Apache woman who saved 5 children, Ayanna became the Apache spy who had infiltrated our town during a moment of weakness. The church had grown completely quiet except for Martha's voice and the distant sound of men's voices outside as they maintained their watch. Through the small windows, the women could see the smoke signals still rising from the canyon, 3 steady columns against the darkening sky. Martha, Eleanor said carefully, do you think this current situation has something to do with what happened back then? Martha's hands stilled on her needlework, and she looked down at the intricate pattern she had been creating. The design was unmistakably Apache in style, stars surrounded by symbols that seemed to tell a story of healing, gratitude, and unfinished business. I think, Martha said slowly, that some debts take a long time to be repaid, and I think that sometimes, when people are pushed to the edges of their world, they remember who showed them kindness when kindness was dangerous to give. Outside, the sound of horses approaching at full gallop drew everyone's attention to the windows. Sheriff Coleman and his men were returning from their latest scouting mission, and their faces were grim with urgency. The church door burst open, and Coleman strode inside, his spurs jangling against the wooden floor. Ladies, I need everyone to listen carefully. The Apache party is less than 2 miles out, and they're heading directly for town. Jake Morrison estimates their numbers at exactly 50 warriors, all mounted and moving with purpose. A collective gasp rose from the gathered women, and several children began to cry. But Martha remained calm, her fingers continuing their steady work on the needlework. Sheriff, she said quietly, did your trackers happen to notice whether the warriors were carrying weapons at the ready, or were their weapons secured for travel? Coleman looked surprised by the specificity of her question. What difference does that make? A great deal of difference, if you understand Apache customs, Martha replied. Warriors preparing for battle carry their weapons ready for immediate use. Warriors traveling for other purposes keep their weapons secured to prevent accidental discharge or loss during the journey. Jake Morrison, who had followed the sheriff into the church, stepped forward. Ma'am, I noticed that their rifles were in saddle scabbards and their bows were unstrung. But that could just mean they're being cautious about their approach, Martha nodded thoughtfully. Or it could mean they're following the protocols for a peaceful delegation. Crawford, the other tracker, laughed bitterly. Lady, 50 Apache warriors don't constitute a peaceful delegation. That's a war party, pure and simple, Mr. Crawford, Martha said. Rising from her pew with surprising dignity, 50 Apache warriors could indeed be a war party. But 50 Apache warriors could also be an honor guard, sent to acknowledge a debt and settle accounts with someone who once showed kindness to their people. The entire church fell silent as Martha walked toward the door, her needlework clutched in her hands. Eleanor jumped up to follow her. "Martha, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Martha paused at the church door and turned back to face the gathered townspeople. "I'm going home to put on my best dress," she said simply, "because I believe we're about to receive very important visitors, and I want to be properly dressed to receive them." Sheriff Coleman stepped into her path. "Mrs. Henderson, I cannot allow you to leave this building. It's too dangerous." Martha looked up at him with eyes that held 40 years of frontier wisdom and the quiet strength of a woman who had faced down fever, drought, childbirth, and death itself. "Sheriff Coleman, I appreciate your concern, but I've lived in this territory since before you were born. I've seen real danger, and I've seen imagined. What's approaching us now isn't something to hide from. It's something to meet with dignity and respect." She gently but firmly moved past him toward the door. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "I have something that belongs to them, and it's time I returned it." The evening air was thick with tension as Martha Henderson walked calmly across the dusty main street toward her modest cabin, her needlework tucked securely under one arm. Behind her, Sheriff Coleman and his men maintained a respectful but worried distance, while the faces of townspeople peered anxiously from windows and doorways throughout Willow Creek. "This is madness," Crawford muttered to Morrison as they watched the elderly woman disappear into her home. "That old lady's going to get herself killed, and probably the rest of us along with her." Morrison, however, was studying the approaching dust cloud on the horizon with a thoughtful expression. "I don't know, Bill. Something about this whole situation doesn't add up. In 15 years of tracking Apache war parties, I've never seen one announce their arrival with smoke signals and maintain travel formation this close to a settlement." Sheriff Coleman checked his pocket watch nervously. "How long until they reach town?" 20 minutes, maybe less," Morrison replied. "They're not pushing their horses hard, which is another thing that doesn't fit the pattern of a raiding party." Inside her cabin, Martha moved with a clarity of purpose that would have surprised anyone who had witnessed her confusion earlier that day. She carefully laid her needlework on the kitchen table and walked to an old cedar chest that sat beneath her bedroom window. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the heavy lid, revealing layers of carefully preserved memories from her 40 years on the frontier. At the very bottom of the chest, wrapped in soft doeskin and tied with sinew cord, was a bundle that she hadn't touched in over 2 decades. As her fingers closed around it, the memories came flooding back with crystal clarity, not the fragmented recollections of her declining mind, but vivid, complete remembrances that filled her heart with both joy and profound sadness. "Ayanna," she whispered to the empty room, and for a moment she could almost hear the musical sound of Apache words being spoken by a gentle voice that had sung her dying son back to health. Martha unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a magnificent Apache cradle board, a work of art crafted from the finest materials and decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns that told the story of a family's love and hopes for their child. The leather was supple despite its age, the beadwork still brilliant in blues, whites, and earth tones that seemed to capture the very essence of the high desert landscape. She remembered the night Ayanna had left it behind in her haste to escape the growing hostility of the townspeople. Martha had found it the next morning, hidden beneath her kitchen table, where Ayanna had prepared the healing teas that saved 5 children's lives. For 23 years she had kept it safe, knowing somehow that one day it would need to be returned. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Martha could hear the nervous voices of the men outside as they took defensive positions. She dressed quickly in her finest blue dress, the one she had worn to church on the day her own son had married and pinned, her silver hair back with the carved bone combs that had been her mother's. As she emerged from her cabin carrying the cradle board, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The Apache riders had come into view at the end of the main street, and the sight was both magnificent and intimidating. 50 warriors mounted on paint horses, their long black hair adorned with eagle feathers, their faces painted not with war designs as Crawford had claimed, but with ceremonial markings that spoke of honor, remembrance, and sacred purpose. At the head of the group rode a man who was clearly their leader, tall, dignified, with streaks of silver in his hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Beside him rode a woman whose face made Martha's heart skip a beat. Even at a distance of 100 yards, even after 23 years, Martha recognized the gentle features and graceful bearing of Ayanna, but it was the young man riding just behind them who made Martha's breath catch in her throat. He was perhaps 25 years old, with the strong features of his Apache heritage, but something familiar in the set of his shoulders, in the way he held his head, something that reminded her powerfully of her own son at that. The Apache riders came to a halt 50 yards from the center of town. their horses standing motionless as statues, while their riders sat with the patient dignity of people who understood the importance of proper protocol. The leader raised his right hand in the universal sign of peaceful intentions, and his voice carried clearly across the distance when he spoke. "People of Willow Creek," he called out in English that was accented but perfectly clear, "I am Joseph Standing Bear, chief of the Chiricahua band. We come in peace to honor a debt that has remained unpaid for too long. We seek the woman known as Martha Henderson, she who showed kindness to our people when kindness was dangerous to give." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his hand resting on his pistol grip but not drawing the weapon. "I'm Sheriff Coleman. State your business and then move on. This town wants no trouble." Standing Bear's expression remained calm and dignified. "Sheriff Coleman, we bring no trouble to your town. We come to return something that was given freely in a time of great need, and to collect something that was left behind in a time of great fear." Martha began walking toward the Apache delegation, the cradle board held carefully in her arms. With each step, more memories crystallized in her mind, not just of Ayanna's brief stay in Willow Creek, but of conversations they had shared during those 3 precious days when a dying child had brought 2 worlds together. "Martha, no," Eleanor called out from the church steps. But Martha continued walking with the steady gait of someone who had finally remembered her purpose. As she drew closer to the Apache riders, Ayanna urged her horse forward and dismounted with fluid grace. The years had added lines to her face and streaks of silver to her hair, but her dark eyes still held the warmth and wisdom that Martha remembered so well. "Ayanna," Martha said softly, and the Apache woman smiled with a radiance that seemed to light up the entire street. "Martha, my friend," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had once sung healing songs over a fevered child. "You have grown older, as have I, but your heart remains the same generous spirit that welcomed a stranger and trusted her with your most precious treasure." Martha looked past Ayanna to the young man who had dismounted and was standing respectfully behind his elder. The resemblance she had noticed from a distance was even more striking up close, not to her own son, she realized now, but to her late husband Thomas in his youth. "This is my son, Robert," Ayanna said, following Martha's gaze. "Though in our language, his name is Blazing Eagle. He was the baby I carried on my back when I came to your home all those years ago." Martha felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at the strong young man who had once been the tiny infant she had glimpsed, sleeping peacefully while his mother worked to save other children's lives. "He's beautiful, you must be so proud. He is the reason we have come," Ayanna explained. "When Robert was born, I crafted a cradle board for him with special prayers and ceremonies. It was blessed by our medicine man and decorated with symbols to protect him and guide his path through life. When I had to leave your town so quickly, I left it behind." Martha looked down at the cradle board in her arms, understanding finally why she had felt compelled to preserve it all these years. "I found it under my kitchen table the morning after you left. I've kept it safe, knowing someday it would need to come home." Ayanna's eyes filled with tears as Martha held out the cradle board. "For 23 years, I have wondered if it was lost forever. For 23 years, my son has lived without the protection and guidance that his birth cradle was meant to provide." Robert Blazing Eagle stepped forward and spoke for the first time, his voice deep and respectful. "Mrs. Henderson, my mother has told me many stories about the white woman who risked everything to help our people. She said you were the proof that kindness can bridge any divide between different worlds." As Martha placed the ancient cradle board into Blazing Eagle's hands, a profound silence settled over Willow Creek. The townspeople who had been watching from their hiding places began to emerge slowly, drawn by the unmistakable sincerity of the moment unfolding before them. Even Sheriff Coleman had relaxed his defensive stance, though his hand remained close to his weapon out of pure habit. Blazing Eagle examined the cradle board with reverent care, his fingers tracing the intricate beadwork that his mother had created before his birth. When he looked up at Martha, his dark eyes shimmered with emotion that transcended the barriers of language and culture. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "this cradle board carries more than just my mother's prayers. It holds the hopes of our entire family, the blessings of our ancestors, and the protection that should have guided my first steps into this world. You have been its guardian for more than half my lifetime." Martha reached out and gently touched the young man's arm. "It was never mine to keep forever, dear boy. I was just holding it until it could come home where it belongs." Chief Standing Bear dismounted and approached the small group, his weathered face expressing a dignity that commanded respect from everyone present. Behind him, the other Apache warriors remained mounted but relaxed, their posture making it clear that this was indeed a peaceful delegation rather than a war party. "Martha Henderson," Standing Bear said, his voice carrying the weight of formal ceremony, "my sister Iana has spoken of you for many seasons. She has told our people of the white woman who opened her door to a stranger, who trusted an Apache mother to heal her dying child, and who defended that act of kindness even when her own people turned against her." Martha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Chief Standing Bear, I did what any mother would do. My child was dying, and your sister offered help. The decision was simple. Simple, perhaps," Standing Bear replied, "but not easy, and not without cost. We know of the troubles that followed, the suspicion and accusations that drove Iana away from your town. We know that your kindness brought hardship to your family." From the gathered crowd of townspeople, Rebecca Miller stepped forward hesitantly, her infant daughter still clutched in her arms. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but are you saying that this woman, Iana, she was here before? In our town?" Standing Bear looked to Martha for permission before responding. When she nodded, he turned to address the growing crowd of curious residents. 23 summers ago, during the time of the burning fever, my sister came to your town carrying medicine that could save the children who were dying. She spent 3 days healing your young ones, asking for nothing in return." Dr. Wilson, who had been watching from his clinic doorway, stepped into the street. "That was before my time here, but I've heard stories about a fever epidemic that broke mysteriously after claiming several lives. The medical records from Dr. Patterson mention that several children recovered suddenly, but he never documented how." Iana spoke up, her English still carrying the musical quality that Martha remembered so well. "The fever came from Badwater that year. Our medicine men knew the plants that could cleanse the poison from children's bodies and break the fever quickly. I brought these medicines because sick children know no difference between Apache and white. They are all precious lives that deserve protection." Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, the preacher's wife, had moved closer to the group, her face pale with recognition. "Wait, 23 years ago. That was the summer little Mary O'Connor recovered from the fever that killed the Hendricks boy, and 3 others, ... Mary O'Connor was one of the 5 children that Iana saved," Martha confirmed, "along with my Thomas Jr., Dr. Patterson's daughter, the blacksmith's son, and young Billy Morrison." Jake Morrison, the tracker, stepped forward with a stunned expression. "Billy Morrison, ... That was my younger brother. He died when he was 8 years old, during a fever epidemic. My parents always said it was a miracle that he recovered when so many others didn't." Iana turned to Morrison with gentle eyes. "Your brother was very sick, but his spirit was strong. The fever medicine worked quickly on him. He was one of the first to recover, fully." Morrison removed his hat and held it respectfully against his chest. "Ma'am, my brother lived to be 34 years old. He died in a mining accident in Colorado 5 years ago, but he lived a full life, got married, had 3 children of his own. If what you're saying is true, then my family owes you a debt we can never repay. There is no debt between parents who love their children," Iana replied simply. "I did what any mother would do. I helped the young ones who needed healing." Chief Standing Bear raised his hand, and the murmur of conversation among the townspeople quieted. "But there is a debt that remains unpaid, and that is why we have come. Martha Henderson, when Iana was forced to leave your town under suspicion and fear, she left behind more than just the cradleboard." Martha looked puzzled. "I don't understand. I searched the house thoroughly after you left, Iana. I found only the cradleboard." Iana smiled and reached into a beaded pouch that hung from her belt. From it she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. "I left something else, Martha, but not in your house. I left it in your heart, the knowledge of our medicines, our healing ways, the recipes for teas and poultices that could help you through many difficult times." As Iana unwrapped the leather bundle, Martha gasped in recognition. Inside were dried plants, roots, and herbs, carefully preserved and organized in small packets. But more than that, there was a collection of small pictographs drawn on pieces of bark, detailed instructions showing how to prepare each medicine, what illnesses they treated, and how to gather and store the plants properly. "You remember, don't you?" Iana asked gently. "During those 3 days, while I treated the children, I taught you the ways of Apache healing. You learned quickly because your heart was open and your love for your son made you eager to understand." Martha's eyes widened as suppressed memories began to surface with startling clarity. "You taught me about willow bark for pain, echinacea for fighting infection, chamomile for calming fevered minds. You showed me which plants grew in our area and how to harvest them at the right time of year. Yes, Ayana confirmed. And you used that knowledge many times after I left, didn't you? When other children got sick, when neighbors needed help when the next doctor was days away and people needed immediate care, Dr. Wilson stepped forward with intense interest. Mrs. Henderson, is this true? Have you been practicing frontier medicine using Apache healing methods? Martha looked around at the faces of her neighbors, many of whom were nodding with recognition. I suppose I have. When little Emma Crawford broke her arm 2 years ago and we couldn't get her to the doctor for 3 days, I made a poultice that helped with the swelling and pain. When the Murphy family all came down with stomach sickness last winter, I brewed teas that helped them recover faster. But I never thought of it as anything special. It just seemed like common sense. Eleanor Pritchard spoke up from the crowd, her voice filled with wonder. Martha, you've been helping people in this town for years with your home remedies. Everyone knows to come to you when someone gets sick and the doctor isn't available. I never realized you learned those skills from ... double quotes from an Apache medicine woman. Standing Bear finished with obvious pride. My sister is one of our most skilled healers. The knowledge she shared with Martha Henderson has been passed down through generations of our people, refined over centuries of caring for our families and communities. Blazing Eagle stepped forward, still cradling the precious cradleboard in his arms. Mrs. Henderson, my mother, has brought these medicines and instructions back to you as a gift, but also as a request. Our two peoples have lived in fear and suspicion for too long. Perhaps it is time for healing to bridge the gap between our worlds. Martha felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she accepted the bundle of medicines and pictographs from Ayana. You want me to share this knowledge with others, to teach what you taught me, if you're willing, Ayana replied. Knowledge of healing should not be kept secret when it could help save lives. Our children, Apache and White, they all deserve the best care we can provide, using wisdom from all sources. As the full impact of the revelations settled over the assembled townspeople of Willow Creek, a remarkable transformation began to take place. The fear and suspicion that had gripped the community just hours earlier dissolved like morning mist, replaced by a growing sense of wonder, gratitude, and profound respect for both Martha Henderson and the Apache delegation that had come to honor her. Sheriff Coleman was the first to remove his hat and approach the group gathered around Martha and Yana. Mrs. Henderson, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I owe you an apology. We all do. When Crawford came running with talk of Apache war parties, I let fear cloud my judgment instead of remembering what kind of woman you are and what you've done for this community over the years. Crawford himself had emerged from behind the general store, his face flushed with embarrassment and shame. Martha, I don't know what to say. When I saw the Apache riders, all I could think about were the old stories, the fears my father passed down to me. I never stopped to consider that they might be coming in peace, or that you might have good reason to welcome them. Martha looked at Crawford with the same patient kindness she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. Bill, fear makes us all forget who we really are sometimes. But that's exactly why this knowledge needs to be shared. Healing brings people together, while fear tears them apart. Chief Standing Bear gestured to his warriors, and several of them dismounted, bringing with them additional bundles and packages. Martha Henderson, he announced formally, the Chiricahua Apache wished to establish a bond of friendship with the people of Willow Creek, sealed by the sharing of healing knowledge and mutual respect. Dr. Wilson stepped forward eagerly, his medical bag in hand. Chief Standing Bear, I would be honored to learn from your healing traditions. Modern medicine has much to offer, but I've seen enough frontier doctoring to know that traditional remedies often work, where my training falls short. Ayana smiled warmly at the young doctor. Healing knowledge grows stronger when it is shared between different peoples. Our plants and your medicines, our ceremonies and your science together, they can help more people than either could alone. Blazing Eagle had been listening to the exchange with growing excitement. Mrs. Henderson, he said, what if we could create something permanent? A place where Apache healers and white doctors could work together, where people from both communities could come for help regardless of their background. Martha's eyes lit up with possibilities. You mean like a healing center? Somewhere that both of our peoples could feel safe seeking help? Exactly, Blazing Eagle. My mother has trained me in the healing arts, as well as the warrior's path. I would be honored to work alongside Dr. Wilson and yourself to establish such a place. The crowd of townspeople had been growing larger as word spread throughout Willow Creek about the extraordinary events taking place on Main Street. Rebecca Miller approached the group tentatively, still carrying her infant daughter. Mrs. Henderson, would this healing center, would it welcome mothers and babies too? I mean, if there were complications during childbirth or if children got sick. Ayana's face softened with maternal warmth. Children are the most precious gift of any people. In our healing center, mothers and babies would receive the gentlest care, combining the wisdom our grandmothers passed down with the best of modern medicine. Jake Morrison cleared his throat and stepped forward. Chief Standing Bear, I want to apologize for my earlier hostility. Learning that your sister saved my brother's life, it changes everything. Is there anything my family can do to help establish this healing center? Standing Bear studied Morrison for a moment, then nodded approvingly. A man who can admit his mistakes and choose a better path. This is the kind of person we want as a friend and neighbor. Your skills as a tracker could be valuable in helping our healers find and harvest medicinal plants in this region. Eleanor Pritchard, who had been unusually quiet during the revelations, finally found her voice. Martha, she said, tears streaming down her face, I've been such a fool. For years I've been coming to you with my aches and pains, and you've always helped me feel better with your teas and remedies. I never questioned where you learned such things. I just accepted your kindness and skill, as if I deserved them. Martha reached out and took Eleanor's hands in her own. Eleanor, friendship isn't about deserving, it's about caring for each other, especially when times are difficult. That's what real community means. Chief Standing Bear raised his hand to address the entire crowd that had gathered. People of Willow Creek, my sister Ayana and her son wish to remain in this area for several weeks to help establish this healing center and to teach those who are willing to learn. During this time, they will need a place to stay and the friendship of good neighbors. They can stay with me, Martha said immediately. My house is small, but my heart is large enough to welcome old friends and new family. Dr. Wilson stepped forward enthusiastically, and I can provide space in my clinic for the healing center. We'll need to expand it, but the church building next door has been empty since the congregation built the new sanctuary. Pastor Jenkins, would the church board consider donating that space for a community healing center? Pastor Jenkins, who had been standing with his wife Sarah, nodded vigorously. Dr. Wilson, I can't speak for the entire board, but I believe any project that brings healing and unity to our community will have the full support of our congregation. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western horizon, casting golden light over the extraordinary gathering in Willow Creek's main street, Ayana approached Martha with a final gift. From her saddlebags, she withdrew a beautiful Apache blanket, woven in patterns that told the story of friendship between different peoples. Martha, she said, wrapping the blanket around her old friend's shoulders, this blanket was woven by the women of our band. Each thread carries prayers for your health and happiness, and each pattern tells a story of the bond between us that can never be broken by time or distance. Martha fingered the soft wool and intricate designs with wonder. Yana, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned, but I feel like I should give you something in return. Yana smiled and gestured toward the crowd of townspeople who were now mingling freely with the Apache warriors, sharing stories and asking questions about each other's ways of life. You have already given me the greatest gift possible. You have shown me that friendship and understanding can overcome any barrier. Look around you, Martha. This is what you have created. Indeed, the scene that unfolded before them was remarkable. Children who had been hiding in fear just hours earlier were now approaching the Apache horses with curiosity and delight, while their parents engaged in animated conversations with warriors about hunting, farming, and family life. Dr. Wilson was deep in discussion with Ayana about medicinal plants, while Sheriff Coleman and Chief Standing Bear were comparing notes about maintaining peace and order in their respective communities. As evening approached and the Apache delegation prepared to make camp outside town, before beginning their extended stay, Martha found herself surrounded by neighbors who wanted to express their gratitude, apologize for their earlier fears, or simply marvel at the day's extraordinary events. Martha Henderson, declared Mrs. Murphy, whose family had been saved by Martha's teas the previous winter, you are a true treasure of this community. We've all been benefiting from your Apache healing knowledge for years without even realizing. Young Tommy Crawford, Bill's teenage son, approached Martha shyly. Mrs. Henderson, would it be possible for someone like me to learn some of these healing skills? I mean, I'm not planning to be a doctor, but it seems like knowledge that could help a lot of people. Martha's face glowed with pride and possibility. Tommy, I think that's a wonderful idea. Healing isn't just for doctors, it's for anyone with a caring heart and the willingness to learn. I'm sure Yana and Blazing Eagle would be delighted to teach anyone who wants to learn. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky over Willow Creek, Martha stood in her doorway watching the Apache campfires flickering in the distance and listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation, drifting from various houses throughout the town. The day had begun with fear, confusion, and the threat of violence, but it was ending with friendship, understanding, and hope for a future where different peoples could work together for the common good. Ayanna appeared beside her, moving with the silent grace that Martha remembered so well. "Thank you, my old friend," she said softly. 23 years ago, you took a risk by trusting an Apache stranger with your most precious treasure. Today, your courage and kindness have created something beautiful, a bridge between our peoples built on healing and mutual respect." Martha smiled, pulling the Apache blanket more tightly around her shoulders against the cool evening air. "Ayanna, I think this is just the beginning. I have a feeling that Willow Creek is about to become a very special place indeed." As the two women stood together in comfortable silence, watching the peaceful scene before them, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the night air. Apache and white children playing together, their joy a testament to the healing power of friendship and the endless possibilities that open up when fear gives way to love. If you enjoy this heartwarming story of friendship, healing, and the power of understanding between different cultures, please take a moment to let us know what you thought in the comments below. Did Martha's courage and compassion inspire you? What did you think about the beautiful bond between her and Ayanna that transcended cultural boundaries? Your thoughts and reactions mean everything to us and help us create more meaningful stories like this one. If you're not already subscribed to our channel, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers who believe in the power of hope, kindness, and human connection. We have many more incredible tallies of courage, friendship, and triumph over adversity waiting for you, and we'd love to have you along for the journey.